Hello, it's September, therefore I'm back at school and I have a cold, obviously. I didn't talk about my August books because I put out videos about my book. And so here's going to be an August-September rundown. There's a big old pile here. Do you want to see it? Yep. So we're going to go as quick as possible. Okay, so I started with Proust, The Captive. So this is our narrator Marcel at his most painful, to be honest. He has taken Albertine back to Paris with him, not because he loves her, but because he gets riven with jealousy if he thinks of her having a lesbian lover. He even says he doesn't love her, he kind of sees her as a cat. And so this is a book where he essentially tries to live his life whilst also trying to keep his eyes on Albertine, and he has long, slightly rancid thoughts about lesbianism, and you know, a lot of the other subplots that keep going on as well with the other characters and stuff. The next one is, in this translation, The Sweet Cheek Gone. So Albertine runs away. That's the climax of The Captive. And very, very shortly afterwards dies in the most ridiculous way possible. She bangs her head whilst out riding. So he has terrific grief. Does he have grief because he was so bad to her? No, not really. He just has grief that she's gone and he has latched on her. And he processes this grief by trying to find out as many salacious stories about her as possible and find out how much she really was going off and shagging women. And then he sort of supplements it and goes to Venice for a bit. Best thing about this actually was his mother, I think, because her mum's died and now she's slowly becoming more like her own mother, and that I found that interesting. I'm not seeing how Proust can change your life with these books. I'm finding the narrator. I'm not even a person who gets sort of het up on dislikable narrators or narrators I can't morally connect with or whatever. I'm usually fine with that kind of stuff, but I just don't like him. And it's the longest novel ever written, so you just spend a lot of time with him because he's the narrator character. I'm just about to start the last volume, going into October. The next book is, well, it's my book, Death of a Dream-Pedlar. Hey, you can get it in paperback, you can get it in hardback. I designed the cover, I wrote the insides, I did everything on this. I'm very proud of this book, I very much like it. I think you should buy it. I think your life would be missing out if you don't. I've had a few feedbacks. Somebody said it was absolutely brilliant and gripping, and someone said they really liked it, and then they had a little lull, and then they got back into it, and it really ended well. And someone said it was weird. But hey, give it a go. It's good. The next thing I read was Sterne's Memoirs. Now, a long time ago, I read something called The Quran, which was not the Quran. It was by a guy called Richard Griffiths, who was pretending to be Sterne for some of it and write fake memoirs, but these really are Sterne's memoirs. And not only are they Sterne's memoirs, they're in Sterne's handwriting, which takes a little bit of reading. And what was interesting about this is that there was a published version of these that his daughter sort of put to the public, and it had some key missing details. So there's a little discussion in here as well about what those missing details mean in our knowledge of Sterne. And I love a bit of Sterne. My t-shirt, which I'm wearing again, is a bit of Tristram Shandy with the plots, though it's fading a bit. Oh, it's a shame. I like this t-shirt. It's very much a in-joke for very few people. My next book was Peter Goodfelllow, Shakespeare's Birds. And again, it's just a little short one. It's all about birds in Shakespeare. How Shakespeare uses birds to portray character or place or mood, and how our understanding of birds has been sort of shaped by how he used them. So some of the time he goes into traditional sort of ideas of, crows being an omen and things like that. But other times he sort of makes his own. For example, I learnt halcyon days means Kingfisher Days. That a halcyon is an old-fashioned term for a kingfisher. So our halcyon days are our Kingfisher Days, which I found really nice. And I read this in the park amongst a bunch of birds, and it was a beautiful halcyon day in August. A very rare one this August, I have to say. Next, Where I'm Reading From by Tim Parks. This is a collection of posts he wrote for the New York Review of Books. He being an author and a translator. A lot of the essays are about sort of the globalization of literature and how this is creating a form of literature where, for example, local voices are diluted in order to spread around the world, and where even sort of English writers are sort of buying into this big globalized literature, and it's all becoming a bit samey. And then there's also some essays about some interesting things to do with translation. He seems to want to sort of cause... they're all individual articles, and I think one of his aims when he was writing the articles was to get responses. So sometimes he'll just say things that are sort of edgy, like, don't finish books, which Samuel Johnson never did anyway. Or he says that the e-reader is the most grown-up way of reading a book, because it doesn't even, if a children's book has pictures, an e-reader doesn't even have paper, And so sometimes he'll do that as well. He comes across as a bit of a curmudgeon. There were some interesting sort of spikes in there that made you think, but on the whole, I didn't love it. Next, One Man, Two Guvnors by Richard Bean. I saw the Haymarket production of this after they come back from the UK tour with mostly the original cast, I believe. And I don't remember anything about it. I remember I enjoyed it. But I've just been cast in it in the local Amdram one. I'm one of the Guvnors. I'm Stanley Stubbers. And so I read the script, obviously, because I'm trying to learn it, which is something I haven't done since uni. It's quite fun. Yeah, one of the odd things about the script is it explains some of the jokes in just sort of italics, almost stage notes saying, oh yeah, ginger is Cockney Roman slang for gay or whatever. And other times gives an alternate version of the joke if you want to, I don't know, if you want to switch it up or change it or, yeah, and that was fun. And as a performer, it's a really good fun play to be in. I'm a posh idiot who gets to say lots of stupid things and commit an inordinate amount of stage violence. So that's good fun. Oh, sorry about that. As I say, cold. So now, are we in September yet? No, we're still in August. Pied Piper by Nevil Shute. I really like Trustee from the Tall Run, which was about a quiet, slightly aging, dull man who goes on this big quest and finds that his sort of quiet dullness gives him the resilience to carry it out. And Pied Piper is the same. It's the same. This time, the aging man finds himself in France as it's being invaded by Nazis, and he tries to escape and get back to England. And as he does so, he gathers all these children and is the Pied Piper, leading them through. One of the funny things was it goes on and on and on about how old he is. And I think he's about the same age as my dad, and I don't see my dad as this old decrepit person. So that was fun and kind of, that's a very different cultural understanding of age. And this book was written in 1942 about events happening in 1941. So, for example, we got the fact that the people in France were expecting Switzerland to be invaded by Nazis next. Or just the inklings of what they knew about what was happening to Jewish people. They knew that they weren't being treated well, but they didn't know exactly. And all this kind of stuff as well. Sort of World War I written pretty much at the time. And Nevil Shute's really good. He's a really easy to read writer, and it's just really just gripping and easy and enjoyable. And I've got a few others, and I look forward to reading him again. Next book was Story of My Teeth by Valeria Luiselli. It's translated from Spanish. It was written, well, this is weird, okay, so it was written as a pamphlet to be given out in an exhibition a gallery owned by a juice company. And so what she did was she wrote it in companion with employees of the juice company, and it was read out to them, and they gave suggestions and things. And it's about this guy called Highway, who's an auctioneer, and he has a special form of auctioneering, which is essentially make stuff up. So he'll make up provenance, and that will make the things he's selling sell for more. So he claims to have removed all his teeth and replaced his natural teeth with Marilyn Monroe's teeth, though it reveals later they weren't. And then he sells his teeth off, saying each one is of some famous person from history. Very unusual. And then he auctions himself off, and his estranged son buys him, and has revenge on him for the estrangement. It's a very odd book. It's split in very odd ways. It's fun. It's not as fun as I thought it would be, though. I thought it'd be weird. But it's not bad. One of the odd little bits is all the characters are named after writers. Then we got the Book of Embraces by Eduardo Galeano, again translated from Spanish. And this is, it reminds me of Daniel Calm's Incidents. It's like tiny stories. And they start off being kind of fably, and they become more and more sort of real-life stories as they go on. And they encompass this whole range of history of modern sort of South American life. There's a lot about dictators and gangs and torture and exile and just violence, but then there's also a lot of moments of joy and family and food, and it's this sort of web of life from all these different fragments, and it's the kind of thing I really like. I like fragments pulling together to create something, and they do pull together and they do create something, and it's a really good book. I really enjoyed the Book of Embraces, though I find it hard to categorize. It's just lots of little things that build up to this big thing, but the big thing you can't explain except by then going through all the little things, that is built up of them, and can't be explained away from them. It's very good. Rambled. Sorry. Next book, Fraud by Zadie Smith. Funny old Zadie Smith. I've met her. I used to work in a school which is mentioned in one of her books, NW. She writes about places I know intimately because she lives in I can't remember which bit of NW now, Kilburn, I think. But I lived in Harlesden and I lived in Willesden, and all that area I know very, very well. But I've never got on with her books. This one was a historical novel about the Tichborne claimant, and I'm very interested in that because he's a fraud and a con man, and I love that kind of stuff. You've seen on here Princess Caribou and Salmanazar. I'm into Martin Guerre, and it's that kind of story. This guy whose name I can't remember disappeared. He was the heir to the Tichborne estate, and then about 10 years later, this guy turns up and says, "I'm him," despite the fact he was much heavier, that he didn't even speak French, which was that other guy's first language, and he didn't even have the tattoo that the other guy had. But people believed him partly because the mother recognised him as the claimant, and he had this man with him called Mr. Bogle, who was a really, really good witness and was very convincing for him to be the claimant. And so it's a very weird story, and he was buried in St. Pancras churchyard, which is one of the little places I used to go during lockdown. So I'm into that. Also, it's narrated from a member of William Harrison Ainsworth's family. And William Harrison Ainsworth is a big character in it. It's partly about how this Tichborne claimant affects their family life. And I love him, and I love his books. And in some ways, that was a bit bad because they really denigrate his books in this. They say he's awful and terrible and talentless and rubbish. And I really like his books. I think he's great. He's not great at everything, but I think he's great. Also, Dickens comes off as a right shit in this. And how those two things together is loose, because it's called The Fraud. Is William Harrison Ainsworth the fraud? Is Arthur Orton the the fraud. The fraud is Mr. Bogle, the loyal servant of fraud. We get a whole bunch from him about his background in Jamaica as a slave, and it's horrible. And I've learnt about a new disease called yaws, which is disgusting. Or is the narrator Mrs. Touchett the fraud? Partly because she comes across as very Puritan, but she's in this book House Ainsworth's first wife's lover and his BDSM mistress. But also because the real Mrs. Touchett died before this book. So the real Mrs. Touchett wasn't around for any of this. So it's a fraud that she's there. So all these things don't come together tidily. They just sort of rub along each other and reflect on each other and sort of, yeah. So I enjoyed it. And maybe I'll give Zadie Smith a better try another time with some of her other books, because I really like this one. Next after me comes The Flood by Sarah Perry. She most famously wrote The Essex Serpent. She wrote Melmoth, which I think I reviewed when I had a cold, because I remember Melmoth coming out weird as it did then. I preferred Melmoth. A lot of people preferred Essex Serpent. This is her first book, actually. It's a lot less flowery. My problem with The Essex Serpent particularly was when she was describing the landscape. I didn't see the landscape. I saw the author sitting at their desk trying to describe the landscape. But in this, again, there's a lot of landscape, but the landscape is salt flats, and I now live near some and walked around them a lot, so maybe I just have a better connection with the landscape. The story itself has this very odd beginning. This guy called John is in the middle of a big drought, which we definitely didn't have this summer. And he goes to a house, and he doesn't mean to. His car breaks down and he wanders to the house for repairs, but everyone in the house is waiting for him and they know him and what's going on. And what's going on actually is a little bit of an anticlimax, but then we get into the dynamics of this house and him in this house, and that's the real meat of it. And it's pretty decent. I mean, out of the one, she's got another one I haven't read yet, but out of the ones I've read, I would go Melmoth, this one, Essex Serpent. So, yeah. The next book is called Putney by Sofka Zinoviev. I got this because it was £1, but also because I read a review of it, and I remembered the title because it's called Putney, and I also used to live in Putney. It's not exactly Lolita. It's a story of, a paedophilic relationship between a 34-year-old man and originally a 9-year-old girl, and he grooms her. And he is one of the narrators, so his bits are a bit humberty because he sees it as this grand eternal love. And then she narrates it, and at first she sees it as this grand eternal love as well. So her life has sort of fallen apart, and now she's 40-odd, and she's got her life back on track, and she's remembering the times with him as the golden time before everything went wrong. And then there's a third person who was her childhood friend, and she's motivated by all sorts of things. One, disgust at the paedophile guy, but also when they were little, sort of jealousy that the other one was getting so much attention. And so what's good about it is that it's not Lolita. It's not just a humbert. It's more people. The Lolita character gets a voice, but also she begins to suddenly realise what had happened, that this wasn't this grand romance, that she was being groomed and that she was raped and all this terrible stuff. And then it's about, well, what do you do next? Do you go to the police and the effect of the arrest on him and all of these things. Slight cop-out of an ending, kind of, but good, because most of it, it took this. Lolita's a sort of this classic text now, classic, quite unpleasant text, but this opened it and gave many more sort of viewpoints to it and rounded it and made it real. And so the abuse happened in the 70s, because of course it did. And it's a very gripping book. It's quite uncomfortable at times. Another book that's a bit uncomfortable at times, Sea Hearts by Margo Lanagan. I don't know how I've got this version, because I think it's Australian, or they changed the title. This is the proof book, and it's published now in England as, I think it's The Brides of Roll Rock. It's a Selkie story. I love a Selkie story. So Selkies, they're seals, they come out, they unzip their seal skin, they're beautiful women, and if you hide their skin, you you get them as your wife, but if they find their skin, they'll jump back in and go away, even if you've built up a life together. But in this, there's an added bit in that it's not just happenstance. There's a witch who can do it, and so all the men of the island pay the witch to get themselves a seal wife. So all the women of the island just leave, and so we start off in the middle of this thing where you've got half seal children and their seal mothers and their human fathers, and then we find out how it came about, and then we find out how it ends and what happens after that, and it's quite grim because the Selkies are exploited in this book, and a couple of them even kill themselves. It's quite and then this weird seal child human thing as well. It's a very odd book. My favourite element of it was all the characters' names. They have the most ridiculous names. I'll just open it randomly. I bet I won't find them now. It's always the way. When I I can't find any of them now, but they all have these grassy. Yeah, there was a grassy, tatty, Miscala. They have all these wonderfully peculiar names that I enjoyed, and yeah, it was good, but a bit odd. So yeah, I managed to get through 2 months there in 20 minutes. So not a lot of detail, but a lot of speed. This month, so I'm starting off with the last of the Prousts, and we'll see where we go from there. But I've got a lot on this month as well, so we'll see.